Hey folks, David Stewart here. I'm here with John Delarose. He's an author, comics writer, businessman extraordinaire. And we're going to talk about classic comics today. That's our focus of today. Classic comics, basically open-ended idea, but I'm thinking comics of yore, the comics we grew up with, particularly Golden Age comics. But I like reading comics from the Golden Age all the way up through today. They're different today, but they had a little bit different feel back in the day. So thanks for joining me, John. And before I go any further, John does have a Kickstarter for a revamp of a classic comic called Dynamite Thor. It is linked in the chat, so please do check that out. And let's go ahead and hop into it. How you doing, John?
I'm pretty stoked. Yeah, I've been really just doing a big dive. I've been diving more into Silver Age comics, but I am diving into Golden Age also. So just getting a breadth of material and interesting stuff to read that's a little different than the whatever flavor of the month Marvel and DC is coming out with for the last 10 years or whatever. And it's been refreshing to read this stuff, I got to tell you. So
yeah, one of the things I notice about Golden Age comics is that they really knew how to introduce a story. They really understood that the point of the medium, even though it's visual, there's a big visual element, it's really to do the story. And so they were very good at introducing a character, explaining how things work, and then jumping into what the plot was going to be for that issue. And each issue usually had its own plot.
Yeah, I was actually reading which volume was I reading? I read so many freaking comics at this point, I get lost. But I was reading, and there's actually a visual recap in the story that it gave like a few, like dialogue box and a couple dialogue boxes and actually unique pictures, and gave like a 2-page visual recap, which was very nice. It's much better than a wall of text, like trying to catch up previously on. So I actually got to see it visually, and that helped me to remember the plot points a lot better of some of the stuff from before also. So stuff like that's really useful. And I think I was talking with Tom DeFalco earlier, who used to be the editor of chief of Marvel Comics. And he says he tries to go into every single comic acting as if this is the first time you've ever read one of his comics or any comic of this character, and making sure that he keeps that in mind so that you can jump in and understand what's going on. And that's so clutch and is something that doesn't exist in modern comics.
Yeah. Now that was also a philosophy of Jim Shooter during the late 70s and early 80s. He was editor-in-chief of Marvel during what's arguably its most successful period, at least financially. They were shipping hundreds of thousands of comics every single month. Sometimes they would ship 750,000 books of one. That's not all together. That's like just X-Men. They could ship 750,000 units of just X-Men. In fact, I think I have.
They regularly did. Not just sometimes.
Yeah.
Regularly.
Yeah, regularly did.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like a special issue, like with, you guys can see this one. What's this one? This is I think Death of Colossus, right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
Hold on to this one. So like this kind of thing, this would just fly off the shelves. You could sell 1 million copies of something like this. And what I love about this is I can pick this up, and like you were talking about, the first splash page has a couple text boxes to kind of fill you in on what's up. And then the characters are jumping right into the dialogue,
right in the action,
right into the story.
You're right in somebody's jet. That's awesome.
And then page 2 is you have the character drama, which was a important. You got to have that character conflict, and then by the third page, the jet has landed somewhere, and there's already like people shouting and aliens beginning to fight. Right. So you go into this stuff quickly. Oh, this is a great ad. I just have to show that awesome bubble yum.
Bubble yum.
So, and muscles. And here's this one. Who's in this one? Oh, Charles Atlas. Look, here's an actual Charles Atlas ad.
Oh, yes.
Muscles in 7 days,
7
guys.
days.
Muscles in 7 days. I loved those old ads. And I kind of, that was something talking with Jesse White, is he's like, I love the old ads. I wanted to put them in my magazine just so you could have them.
Maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll do a crowdfund with like fake old ads, like scattered throughout it. That'd be fun.
Yeah, I think that would be really fun. And I think, he had them as like crowdfunding tiers. So like if you did the $50 tier, then you could put an ad. He put an ad in that was like your choice of what kind of ad you wanted. Right. So not only did you get the book, you got like a permanent place in it. Like you'd be an ad for your website or for your YouTube channel or something like that. It was a really cool idea.
Yeah, Kurosawa magazine, they sell ads periodically for their deal, and that's something that is a nice little revenue source and is kind of handy. I mean, I know when I read that magazine, I'm going to show it for them hard. I read that magazine every time it comes out. I stop and I see, oh, who's advertising in this, and I definitely take note of those names for sure. So, yeah.
So yeah, I love that stuff, and that's something that I kind of miss from the old newsprint days. Just the fact that it was printed on newsprint lets you know that they meant to sell a lot of copies. It was something that it was a periodical. It wasn't something just to have to look at, like put in like the little plastic case and never pull out, but something that you really were supposed to read and enjoy. And that's something that I really liked about all of the areas prior to this. But I think once we get to the 90s, you have a little bit of a shift in tone where things start to be a little more soap opera-y. It becomes a little bit more about the having things cross over and having big dramatic conflicts between characters rather than just these stories.
Yeah, they were trying to push, hey, comic book head. I already said hi in the chat, but hey again. Hey, John M. Cool. John M reminds you to comment and like and subscribe. So that's a very important thing to do.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.
The 90s really pushed a different thing. I wouldn't blame soap opera. I think soap opera is great. And I know that might have a bad connotation to like some male audience members or whatnot, but soap opera is everything you're into. Like Stan Lee was the master of soap opera. And if you look at the way that Peter Parker's Spider-Man developed, you got a mix where, you've got the cool fight against Electro or Doc Ock or whoever. Yeah. You're also flipping that page to find out if Aunt May is going to survive her recent heart problem or if Mary Jane's going to show up and actually go on a date with him this time. The soap opera element really made the old pulpy comics shine, and that's something that didn't exist really, I'd say, in the golden age so much. They were a little flatter in that regard, and Stan Lee really pushed that.
I think the golden age was mostly about like getting that adventure through.
Yeah,
and you really approached it from the perspective like a reader's never seen this before, and they're probably we'd like them to buy another one, but they probably won't buy another one. So you just kind of fling stuff out there and see what's happening. Trying to find some stuff in
there you go
collections. So I started getting these because John has them, and so it's a really good way to collect them. I've been getting them where I can, so I pretty much started with Amazing Spider-Man because that's what I grew up reading, and a lot of these I don't have in any kind of other kind of version, and it's on good magazine paper. It preserves the colors pretty well. So these are a cool way to check that out. But you're right, it is very soap opera-y with Spider-Man. And I think I'm trying to think who it was on Twitter I saw talking about when they, Jim Shooter was very against marriages, right?
Yeah,
because it takes a bunch of the tension out of the mix.
It does in some ways, I guess, but in other ways, you kind of want to have a breadth of characters, I feel like. And, that wasn't just Jim Shooter. That's been the last 30 years. It seems like everybody's against any permanent marriages in comics or anything like that. Yeah. And I think that's a shame. And you look and, some of them were kind of ordained from Stan Lee to begin with. Even Peter Parker and Mary Jane were a Stan Lee and John Romita thing they were doing in the newspaper strip version of the comic. And then they're like, hey, you guys really should push this over into continuity so it all matches with the newspaper. That's actually how it came about. So those were wanted by the original creators. And I think showing marriage and showing, there are conflicts within marriage and different things that can go on with this, different stories within marriage that can be told. I just think it's lazy on the behalf of writers. And I think, I don't know, in Shooter's defense, he probably just wanted to make sure the characters don't get old because, you're now in the 80s looking at a 30-year thing and you're thinking, well, what's going to happen in 2020 if these characters are married now? Are they going to be grandparents at that point? We can't have this, right?
Yeah. And so this was a thing I remember from the early 90s too, is we had, we had Spider-Man and Mary Jane got married, and I remembered who was talking about it. It was actually Eric Larson who drew Spider-Man. I'm trying to remember what years he drew Spider-Man. He's the guy who does. I mean, his main thing now, I think, is what is it? Savage Dragon. So I think he's coming out with Savage Dragon 250. That he's done all of that just himself, which is really pretty cool.
Yeah, a lot of people really crap on Eric Larson right now because of his politics. But the guy is a workhorse. I mean, he draws it himself. He writes it himself. He produces.
And he's
a
really good artist too. He's talented and he knows the props. Yeah, and he has the he knows the technique, and he's really happy, by the way, to give like feedback on art, and he'll have things on Twitter that explain this thing or that thing's wrong with the art, because he really is good. So he drew Spider-Man, I think, when Spider-Man and Mary Jane got married, and it was kind of like are we actually going to do this? Are we actually allowed to have them get married? And so in the 90s, it was like, well, are they going to have a kid? Because that was going to be the next step. So it's like, is the kid going to have spider powers? Like, what's going to be, what's going to happen? I think it would have been interesting to see a Spider-Man actually grow into middle age with a child who has some kind of superpower.
There's a way that you can see that, sir. And let me tell you about a comic book that's going to change your life. It's called Spider-Girl. And it is written by Tom DeFalco, of course, and that's why I had Tom on today, because that is my favorite comic book of all time. And what he did is he started with one of those what if issues, if you remember those, where they kind of go out of continuity and do what ifs, and they do what if Spider-Man and Mary Jane had a baby.
Okay, that's right.
And then she grew up to be 16 years old, and her inherited the spider powers. They showed up, and it became this drama where like they knew she was Spider-Girl. And they're being parents about it. So they're like, you can't go out and be Spider-Girl because it's too dangerous. And she'd be like, you did it when you were my age, Dad. Like it was a really interesting drama like that. And it actually showed the married couple working and interacting as a healthy married couple with a healthy child relationship with a teenager. It was really neat. I've really never seen much like that ever.
Yeah, I never really read it. I think it just came, when did it start?
1999.
Yeah, see, I was out of comics by that point. I just really wasn't reading them anymore. And then I look back, it's like, why did I stop reading comics? And I think it was just I stopped being interested in what was being put on the shelves.
Yeah, and I was too, because I quit the regular Spider-Man title at that point. And this brought me back because it had what we're talking about, where it's got like a single issue tells a full story. The beginning kind of recaps you, and then you get that little cliffhanger at the end that sets up the next one, and it just keeps going in that sort of like pulpy mentality. And that is that's what I want out of comics. I want that pure fun, that pure action, right?
Yeah. Well, this is something that, I mean, if you guys go buy the original, like these epic collections, something you'll pick up on quick that Stan Lee does is he establishes the conflict basically in the first page.
Yeah.
And that means that being able to establish the conflict early on means that the reader is automatically right in the interest level of the max interest level of the story. And so that means you could take more time actually to tell a story. Stan was actually very good at telling very condensed stories. He could tell a story in 12 pages, which he did. The very first Spider-Man story in Amazing Fantasy, I think, is 12 or 15 pages. Just not a lot of space to tell a story, but he tells a really good story. And that's each page is like a little mini act of a tragedy. The tragedy being his uncle dying at the end and him figuring out that it was the guy he refused to stop. You know, it's a great introduction to a character as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Somebody asked in the chat, is there a good, where is this? Is there good literature to comic adaptations that you like and recommend? I'm going to recommend something that's not out yet. It is out in issue form. Marvel Comics actually did a series called Marvel Classics back in the 70s. And Chris Claremont, the writer of X-Men during those great times that David was just showing, wrote all of these single issues that each issue covers a classic. So one of them is the Iliad, one of them is the Last of the Mohicans, one of them is Treasure Island, Robinson Crusoe. So they go through all these classics as single issues and just one to the next. And they're coming out with an omnibus of this in late August, just called Marvel Classic Comics Omnibus. And it's all of those collected issues. So that's That's what I'm going to recommend, because that's going to be super cool when that comes out.
All right. Well, I'm going to check that out too. Another one I was thinking of is actually now. This is not a strict adaptation, but there's two that you can look at. One is the Conan comics. The Conan comics are original stories, and in some cases, they're adaptations of other Conan stories. Then there's also the Elric comics, which were, I believe, written by Michael Moorcock himself. So the Elric comics are also really good, and there's a whole bunch of them. I think the one I'm thinking of is called Elric, Stealer of Souls. There's a bunch of them you can check out and look at, and those are really, really interesting. And I was thinking about both of those because both of those things really happened like in the 70s and 80s. We hadn't had a lot of, say, literature to comic adaptations lately. You know, it just hasn't been a big thing. So I have to kind of rack my brain to think about ones where they did that, where they adapted something that was a book and turned it into a comic.
I've done it.
You've done it?
I adapted Richard Fox's The Ember War. Yeah. So he's got a great pulpy science fiction series. And I made a graphic novel out of it. And I thought it turned out really good. So that was a lot of fun. Very difficult. It took me so much longer to write an issue of that than it does of my regular comic, just because I had to line everything up with the book. I didn't want to like get dialogue wrong or attribute something to the wrong, because he's got his readers. So I just wanted to be meticulous with like making sure it was accurate, which caused a lot of research, I guess, compared to, my normal comic books.
Yeah. Where you can just kind of let loose the story.
Yep. It's fun. And I prefer that. So will I do it again? I don't know. I mean, I liked working with Richard. He's cool. And, I know he's itching to get, his second book done in that. He wants his whole Ember War line done in comic books, which is 13 novels. Cool. So that's quite a challenge, and that'd be a full-time job right there. So I don't know.
Yeah. I've had some people talk to me about adapting, I think, what was it? Water of Awakening. It's like, if you thought about doing a graphic novel of this, I'm like, I really haven't. There's a lot of story there, so it would end up being, each chapter would really be its own issue because it's kind of in an Odyssey format.
Yeah, that's tough. Idea. That would be fun. As long as you keep it going, just don't finish it, right?
Yeah.
Or I mean, that'd be the tough part with the graphic novel, because they take so long to get the art done. It's like you don't want to like leave somebody stranded like 4 chapters in, right?
Yeah. Okay, so here's one from Hardwick again. They said he was disappointed to take a Golden Age character out of his original setting and into our era. So what are you doing with Dynamite Thor?
I'm not actually doing that. So that's going to be the twist here. So I took a page out of a playbook from my good friend Chuck Dixon, who also, taught me everything I needed to know about comic writing. He had a book called Airboy, and Airboy actually in the late 80s from Eclipse Comics was a Golden Age sort of nod, because he loved that Airboy character and took it out. But what he did was make the Airboy in the 80s the son of Airboy in the Golden Age. So he just took the guy's gadgets and kind of had the same sort of skills and went on similar adventures. So that's what I did here. I have Dynamite Thor is this is the grandson of the 1940s Dynamite Thor, and so his adventures are still intact. And then this guy is now kind of taking up the mantle of his superpowers, which are immunity to explosives. So you get a little bit, and here's sort of the past where I kind of reference the top panels from one of the is a redo of one of the actual panels from the actual classic Dynamite Thor. He does chuck a piece of dynamite at a villain's gun and knock it out of his hand in the original books, which I thought was awesome. So I'm definitely trying to keep that character intact, do something on my own also, and then bring awareness to this character. Because the other thing we're doing is we're actually taking those old stories and we are recoloring them so that all the colors pop, and then printing them on sort of nice paper these days. It's going to look like this. To bring back these stories, make it a better experience for people to read.
Yeah, see, I went back and so I know that you watched this video. I did a video earlier that was newsprint versus the magazine paper. And while I appreciate the aesthetics of the newsprint, there's no question, looking at a book from 30 years ago, that Venom book, that the newer paper holds the colors much better. It's a better method of preservation than the newsprint.
It does. And I actually talked to a newsprint printer, and I'm like, am I going to have to adjust my colors? And he gave me all these guidelines to like really dial things back. And so I'm like, I don't want to do that. The new paper is so much better. I've got an old Golden Age comic. Hold on, let me grab this restoration and then just show it on screen here. Of course, I have all this stuff, guys. So this is Timely's greatest, and I don't have the best lighting here, unfortunately, but and it's Namor this is the Human Torch. And they actually went through and did exactly what I'm doing and restored it and then put it on the nice white paper. And you can see, well, if you can put my screen a little bigger, you can see that the colors are just really crisp and sharp here.
Where are you? There you are.
There I am. Even though I've got bad lighting, it's just really easy to read, and it was just printed very nicely. Now, it did not look like this on the original comics whatsoever, but this is the way that it would have looked if the colors would have been true in those comics.
And if they had, because also one of the things about the way they print them, like you can see the same thing with like the Spider-Man comics. They're just super bright. Just
super bright.
Pops, yeah.
And they loved that. The aesthetics of the 60s and 70s, they wanted the heroes to be bright and pop and have that aesthetic feel to it. But they also had a limited printer range that only had 64 different colors. So
so you had to kind of pick what colors you were going to have.
And have a contrast.
Yeah, and so that's one of the things that I did notice about this. Notice the blues are really blue. Notice how bright the blues are, how bright the greens are. They really pop off the page with this. And while I do appreciate the newsprint aesthetically, it softens that a little bit. It yellows a lot. You know, even when you take good care of a comic, it yellows a lot. So the nicer paper will actually preserve the art, I think, a little bit better in the long run. The other thing too is that because they printed things on different plates, on the older ones, you get some slight misalignment of colors. Then you get to fix that, make that actually look the way it's supposed to look.
Yes, which is great.
The colors are actually in the lines, because sometimes the blue or one of the color plates is just a little bit
and
off.
It bleeds over. I know it's something we're trying to fix in all these Dynamite Thor strips. So it's actually not all that hard to do. My colorist actually says he's very much enjoying the process and is happy to do. He's hoping we can do more of these, and I'm like, I don't know that this is that profitable that I'm going to do a lot more of these, but if it did end up profitable, I definitely would. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, I think so too. And this is another thing about a lot of these older, I guess just older comics in general, is that there is a need for preservation of some things. What happens when time filters things out is that some things get filtered out. And so if nobody's bothered to, say, digitally transfer a comic from the 40s, eventually you can't reconstruct it because you lose all the original copies.
Yeah, that's happened
to the point where you lose what's possible.
Jack Kirby, of course, was a monster in that he just did so many freaking comics back then. And he actually had a bunch of full comics that he drew and never got released, like tons of them. And I was actually reading a reprint book where they were actually, then inking over it and just making it look nice and doing that. And unfortunately, just because of like what you said, like 3 of the pages have gone missing and they just don't have any access to those 3 pages to do that. So they had to like kind of summarize what those 3 pages were supposed to be based on the script, rather than actually show those 3 pages just because they're gone. And these 40s and 50s books, a lot of them are getting forgotten. Dynamite Thor was somebody who lasted 5 stories. So they definitely were not going to keep him around for the long term. And people forgot that this very fun hero existed. And, I want to preserve that sort of history because I think the 40s and 50s and 60s, there's a lot there that we've already forgotten because we've kind of just dialed things into celebrity names, right? And not it's all Jack Kirby now. We know every Jack Kirby thing, but we don't know Lincoln Wright. That's the creator of Dynamite Thor here. Like, what did this guy do? It's interesting to go find this stuff.
I think so too. I think that's an interesting idea too. There's a lot that gets gets kind of passed over in the passing of things. And we're kind of down to two big comic companies at this point, which is Marvel and I know we always talk about the big two because there's other ones like Dark Horse. And actually, I mentioned it's like, oh, I stopped reading comics in like 1995 or something. It's like I actually kept reading Dark Horse comics because they kept coming out with stuff that I thought was interesting.
They always do kind of cool, out there, weird stuff. So they have a lot of good stuff to read for sure.
Yes, but there were a lot of things that weren't Detective Comics or Marvel Comics from that age too. There was a big kind of a big, I don't want to call it like a contraction of the market, but it basically was a contraction in the market, like a crash that happened after World War II that kind of reduced the comics landscape down to just a few players. And then it took quite a while for that to build back up. And I think also along the way, we've lost a lot of different genres of comics. The horror comics kind of got lost on the way. We're kind of just down to the big two doing a lot of Superman.
Yeah. One thing that I've taken note of is romance comics are completely gone. And so I just started scripting one 2 days ago because I'm like, this cannot stand. So I'm just going to do it. I don't know if there's a market for it, but I don't know. I like to write new things all the time, so I'm just going to do it. Yeah.
There's definitely a market in the manga space in the US, which that means to me that's a market that wants graphic format. I'm going to call them graphic format, but graphic format stories, and is going to Japan and waiting for translations to get the stories that they want to read in the format that they want to read.
Right.
That's a potential underserved market. I mean, I would look at almost anything in the manga space and say, well, if it's selling good in America, or if it's selling well in America, that's an opportunity to provide another product that's just in English rather than having the Japanese, having to have like a Japanese translation going. I mean,
it's a great point.
Set in the other room. So sorry about that. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think that's a great idea, and maybe I'll start kind of looking at what's over there and moving towards that more. I definitely, obviously, I don't know, in the indie sphere, most people say don't make superhero comics. Superhero comics are just going to kill you. And I've, other than the Ember War, I've pretty much I guess that's not true now. I've made a steampunk comic now too, but
yeah.
For my crowd funds, I've mostly done superhero comics, and I've done very successfully with those superhero comics. Dynamite Thor is lagging a little bit behind, but that's we found out that's because the actual campaign was not showing up on the site of Kickstarter for a week. Like nobody could find it unless they already had the link from me directly. It was kind of a bizarre situation. But that's superhero comics really are flooded by Marvel and DC, so to compete against that's really, really hard. And so indies typically like do what you say and kind of try to make their way in a different space, but the American indies don't do it super successfully. So I don't know. Maybe just trying to ape manga a little bit more might be a better alternative there.
Yeah, if I'm thinking marketing strategies, first of all, I have one up from Jared who says he stopped buying comics around 2012. Now, I've talked to a number of people that's exactly what they say. It's like 2010. The early 2010s is when whatever was going on seemed to fall off the rails, and I kind of checked out way before that, but it seems like there was some kind of crossover that happened around that time as well. They brought in writers that were more focused on politics or something. I don't know what exactly was going on because I wasn't paying attention at that point, but I like collecting collections of old comics.
I stopped because of One More Day Spider-Man. When was that? 2006?
Was that the one where like he makes a deal with the devil and it like divorces him or something?
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay,
I was like, I'm out. Pretty easy event there. So I think that things kind of collapsed from there through 2012 as all these writers kind of realized, I think from the success of some films back then, that, hey, we can kind of write some things that if we get enough attention, we can either get in the news and get attention, or we can get our ideas thrown into a film. And so they stopped really caring about the comics and caring about the individual issues. And it was around that point. And then, then films really took over, and everything's been just stagnant since then because they are not allowed to be creative within those, big company comic spaces now.
Yeah, I think also, already in the 1990s, Superman had been going on 30 years. And that's a long time to be I'm not Superman, Spider-Man.
Spider-Man.
Superman had been going on
Superman, we're talking 70.
60 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
So 30 years, and that marriage to Mary Jane was important because after 30 years, we kind of felt like he needs to take a step forward, like something needs to be happening in the world of Spider-Man. I look at the comic space now with Marvel, and it's the same heroes I grew up with, but nothing
You've got a
essential
stagnant universe where everything gets erased, everything gets reset, and so there's really a limited, like, you can't really have stakes in that kind of environment. So it's like, somebody dies, so what? They'll be back in a year. Somebody gets married, yeah, that'll be erased next year.
Or like they'll die and their alternate dimension counterpart will come in to replace
when that's
them.
The case, it just makes it really hard to connect. And that's again a benefit of indie comics at this point, that you can tell stories and you don't have to play by those rules.
Yeah, I would say, I think that is a good point. I'd also say, you have the Ross and Rachel problem when you're telling soap opera style stories, which is you had all this tension between Ross and Rachel and Friends, and then they got together. And once they got together, it's like that interest in watching the show wasn't there, and they couldn't find something else that was as interesting as that.
That's tough.
They had to break them up. And once they break them up, then people get upset. They're like, well, I liked Ross and Rachel being a character.
Right.
I liked that resolution. I don't like that you undid that resolution.
Right. That's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. 100%. You nailed it.
All right. With the new film Bloodshot coming out, do you think you guys will watch it? I'm not familiar with the comic it's based on.
Personally. I am. So Valiant Comics was a company that formed in 1992, headed by Jim Shooter, who was the head of Marvel before that. And he brought over some amazing talent, and they basically made superhero clones. So Bloodshot basically is the Punisher and Wolverine mashed together. So you have this character who is a soldier with a super healing ability and super healing nanites that just like make him so he just can never die, and he just goes and just like kills everything. And that's what it was. And it was a ton of fun. Joe Quesada, did Joe Quesada draw? No, he drew a little of Ninja K. That's a different one. But they had several characters like that and had a great universe going. Acclaim Video Games company bought them out and then started making video games of them. And whatever they did with the comic side just like tanked everything. And that was pretty much the end of the comics. And then they got shut down. They relaunched in 2012 under the tutorship of my friend Dinesh, whose last name I don't know that I can pronounce. Shamdasani. Sorry, Dinesh, if you watch this and did that. Dinesh restarted it in 2012. He reset the universes, built up the characters so it was a shared universe from the start, kind of changed things up a little bit. So these are different versions of those characters. There's no continuity between them. And it was really, really well done. Dinesh also sold the company, and then the company got bought by a Chinese investment group that's into movies. So there's good and bad. One, I would not recommend any of the comics that have come out in the last 2 years because they've tanked just like before, and they've gotten infiltrated by corporate cancer. But they did make this Bloodshot movie, and Dinesh actually was a part of getting this going. Vin Diesel is going to be starring in it, which is always a good sign. And it's just going to be awesome. So I'm 100% going to see it. The Bloodshot comics, I would say, if you can get the like deluxe hardcovers of the stuff from either 2012 to 2017, that's good. Or the old issues from 1992, those are very much worth reading also. And I very much look forward to this movie. I'm more excited for this than any Marvel film.
All right, great. Well, then I'll probably check it out just because it's not, I felt like I'm, I look at the horizon of MCU, and I've made some content on this, but I don't think it looks good, guys. Nope. I think it's heading for. That's why I said that what's his name, Kevin Feige, should retire. They're like, what? Why would he retire at the top of his game? It's like, because that's when you go out, is when you win your second Super Bowl. That's when you retire, so that you never have to lose another game.
Unless you're Tom Brady, then you just keep going.
Then you keep winning Super Bowls. No, but I think of John Elway spent all his career in the NFL to win a Super Bowl, and he won two in a row. And then he go out at the top of your game. You go out when you're at the top, when you've accomplished everything you need to accomplish.
You'll have less brain damage that way for sure.
Yeah, Kevin Feige he came out with the most profitable movie ever made at this point, which was, I think, Endgame. I think that's a great time to step back and collect your money and retire with some passion projects.
They're going to run into the problem that you just can't get more epic than and this is a big problem with storytelling and serial storytelling of comics and events that they've done in comics for 20, 30 years and novels too. You can't out epic the epic. So like once you've saved the country, you got to save the world. Then you got to save the universe. Then you got to save the multiverse. And once you've done that, you kind of have nowhere to go.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you can actually see that a little bit with some of the sub-series in the MCU. So you have, you have these, say, like if you're looking at Iron Man, it's like Iron Man 1, Iron Man 2 raised the stakes. Iron Man 3 was like, I'm having anxiety attacks. They just had to go in a different direction afterwards, and people didn't like it. Now, I didn't think Iron Man 3 was a bad movie at all, but people were expecting somehow the stakes to get even higher. It's like, well, he's already in the Avengers, which are dealing with like AIs destroying the world. So that's not, if you go back to the Solo movie, where else are you going to go? So you can take it a different direction.
I know it. We got Art T. Bear in the chat. Art is a great artist. He really has done a lot of good work, and love the look of Chrono Mechanics there, dude. So cheers.
Yeah, with a great thumbnail. Hope that's a self-portrait. They get the self-portrait of like you mid-blink. It's like only, that would take some balls. Anyway, so that's something that they're not going to just run into that, but they've also been running out of the classic stories.
I know.
So there's these classic Marvel stories from like the 60s up through the 90s. And once you run out of those, where do you go? Like once you have already like plowed through the Rob Liefeld stuff, there's just not that much afterwards. They
have quite a bit more than people think, I think, but they're not household names. I guess you don't have your Spider-Man. You're gonna have to dig into like, they've already done Luke Cage, they've already done Iron Fist. You're gonna have to dig into like Werewolf by Night, right? Which are great stories. Great stories, but yeah. Wrong.
Well, what I was in the classic stories, like the classic X-Men stories is what they keep trying to do over and over again in the movies. But I'm thinking, like the Colossus stuff, the bigger parts of Spider-Man stories. They've already done those. They've kind of used up a lot of Stan Lee's material, and what I see them doing with Thor is they're going to have Thor is, I guess, going on an adventure with the Guardians of the Galaxy. So they're going to have his girlfriend be Thor, which is what they did with the comics. At some point it's like she picked up the hammer and became Thor. I never read it.
I haven't read it either. And I haven't heard bad things about the story. So I don't know. I might start reading it.
I've mostly heard bad things about it.
I don't know. Have you?
But, yeah, but when I see that and people are having a reaction like, well, where is Thor is not going to be in the Thor movie or something like that, then you start to pull stories from a much less popular period where the stories may be good or they may not, but they haven't had that filtering to where, like, let's be honest, most Spider-Man stories are forgettable, but the ones that aren't, people really remember them. Some of the Green Goblin ones, a lot of people don't remember Spider-Man versus Sandman or something like that, or Electro, or some of these other, the Vulture. We don't see those in movies. They just they're okay, but they get kind of lost in what people talk about over and over again are these storylines from a lot of them from the 80s too, especially with X-Men. So I think they're going to, the source material is going to become harder to access. They've already dug up the meaty bits and cooked them. Yeah,
that might be the case. We'll definitely see. I think Black Widow should be pretty decent.
I think it's a prequel. It's a prequel, right?
Is it?
Yeah, they killed her in Endgame, so it's a prequel. And I think the woke crowd was getting upset that it was a prequel or something. They're like, "Oh, you can't let a female superhero be alive. She has to still be dead in the movie. I don't remember what it was. You can't please him though.
That's a big stretch. I don't know. It looks
Yeah.
okay. I'm probably going to see that. I don't even know what else is coming out this year. What else is coming out this year? Do you know?
I honestly haven't kept track. I've kind of checked out of movies after this last Star Wars one. I don't get to go see a lot of movies because I have young children. And
I saw Sonic the Hedgehog because I have young children.
Yeah, I mean, my daughter's 11 months old yesterday.
Oh, that's a different level of young children. Yeah,
baby, you know. So yeah, she's a baby, so I don't get to do a whole lot of that because I'd have to like you got to leave your wife at home, and that you say, hey, can you just like stay home with the kids while I go do something fun? It's like, yeah, we could do that, I guess. Like that doesn't feel good, or you have to pay a lot of money to a babysitter to make it happen. So I just kind of checked out of it, and it's like I sell books. I really like talking about books. I like reading books. I kind of want to talk about the stuff which I like to read.
That's true.
I'm on movies.
Me too.
I'm kind of torn though because I know there's a lot of my audience that really likes movies and likes me to talk about movies, but I just don't have a lot of time to go see them. And so you kind of have a relevancy thing. Like I could review it on video, but that's months later when nobody cares. They want to see like something opening weekend. They want to see me. And this is another problem too, is that the negative reviews always get more views than the positive ones.
I know.
So people drop by and they're like, you crap on every movie. I'm like, I actually like most movies, but when I crap on a movie, that's the one you click on. You never click on the review of like, I recommend this movie, because you're like, well, it's not going to be as fun unless he's ripping it apart. I don't know.
Yeah, I understand that, and I've got the same problem. I mean, I mostly review stuff like this these days. This Human Torch deal that I've got, and these are stories from 1939. So it's like, how many people are actually interested in a story from 1939? Most people are looking for reviews of the new X-Men issue or whatever that just came out this week. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm satisfied because I again, it's just like I'd rather talk about what I like and want to talk about than chase the audience, right?
Yeah, attract the audience that's like you is kind of where I'm at. Excalibur was a great series by Marvel. Felt like the characters got to shine in weirder stories that were pulled off well.
Absolutely, and there's epic collections of those now, so that's something that you guys can catch up on.
If you're a little bit off the mainline series, I think you could take more risks, and I think that makes the stories more interesting. I'm actually kind of more interested in buying newer Marvel stuff the last however long. Maybe that's because the indie comic scene has poisoned me to make me want to go back and read more Marvel and DC stuff.
Well, yeah, the indie comic scene got pretty bad there for a second, and a lot of them there's a lot of indie comics, and that's what people don't realize. You can't really look at one Twitter group and be like, that's indie comics. There's a lot that's going on. And there's a lot of great stuff out there. Maybe I'll try to highlight some more because, stuff like Matt Kinn's a great writer who just does out there stuff. And he doesn't get talked about. John Layman's stuff doesn't really get talked about. He did Chew, and that got really popular for a while, but his new stuff is really off the wall and interesting too. Again, just not getting talked about. And the things that don't get talked about die on the vine. So it is kind of on us to fix that. Yeah. So I'll work on it.
Yeah, I'm going to work on it too. I mean, that's why I have Newpub Talk. I like Newpub Talk because it's just focused entirely off of, like I don't need to talk about Tor books.
No, I'm not interested. Right.
Yeah. Who cares? Right. They already get talked about. They already have books on the shelves. People already know who Brandon Sanderson is. I want to talk to people who are a little bit outside of the mainstream. That's what I'm more interested in. But yeah, I mean, and that's a good point. You always have to look a little bit broader here. Could you ask John if he's seen the Green Knight movie trailer?
I just Googled it because of this comment, and I have not seen it, and I am interested in watching the trailer at the very least. So
I would put the trailer on right now, but then I'd have a copyright claim.
Dang it, so, YouTube.
Yeah, so that's the reason that I don't do like say play-by-play. I've done a couple of these way in the past of like play-by-play scene analysis of movies, like what they did at the camera, where all that kind of stuff. But it just gets knocked off of YouTube. It gets pulled down because of copyright claims, and it takes months to resolve that. It's just no point. Really no point to do it.
Sad.
So I'll check it out. I'll check it out too.
I'll check it out too, and maybe we'll ask us next time, and we'll answer. Cool.
Cowardice from Marvel. It'd be awesome to explore what happens after you save the multiverse. That was the highlight of Iron Man 3, his reaction in New York. Yeah, that's kind of that was the point I made. Like they had to go in a different direction with Iron Man 3.
But most people don't love that. I love that movie. Yeah, I agree with you. I think
it's a good movie.
But it'll dip in sales and they know it. So
it's my wife's favorite Marvel movie, I think, is actually Iron Man 3, because it's like he's so much more human in that. I like him more in that because he's more human. It's more like a regular person dealing with excessive stress.
Makes sense.
I told her she's not allowed to watch Endgame though. She's like, he dies. I don't want to see it.
I still haven't seen Endgame. So
well, here's how I would explain Endgame, and I said this before, and I don't know who really took it in and knew what I meant. It's a capstone experience. It's not even really a movie. Like it has very bare plot as far as it's not tightly plotted or anything. It's really about just ending the MCU. It's almost like a series end to a TV show where they show you clips from the past episodes to get everybody nostalgic before they pull the plug on the series. They even travel back in time to the other movies, and do funny stuff in those. Where like they're trying to steal.
So it's like that. Is that like that Deep Space Nine last episode where like they like had flashbacks over the music, like when they were in the orb, but it was really just flashbacks of the show.
yeah, it's exactly that. So they travel back in time to the other Avengers movies because they have to steal all the Infinity Stones to snap everyone back into existence, right? So the conflict's pretty basic. We got to snap everyone back into existence. How do we get the stones? We got to travel backwards in time to steal the Infinity Stones before they get stolen, and that allows, moments where like Tony Stark gets to meet his dad again and like talk to his dad, but his dad doesn't know it's him. And he's like having an emotional breakdown because he misses his dad so much, which a lot of people can relate to if you've lost a parent and it's been a long time, or you lost a parent through violence or something like that. So it was like a really, really good moments. And that's really what the movie was about. So people that wanted some kind of super tightly plotted thing that would follow, this guy's not following David Stewart's rules of plot. And like, I enjoyed it because it knew that what it was just a movie to end the MCU, bring everything together and have a big epic battle at the end where literally everything is on the line. Every person from the past, present, and future is on the line. And then they do it, So they did a really good job of that. If you look at it as what it's supposed to be.
They've conned us into talking about this again when we should be talking about classic comics, though.
You're right. Yeah, you're right.
I want to recommend a few things as we're getting kind of towards the end of this here. I think it's very important to check some of this stuff out. I really love Masters of Suspense. It's an omnibus again. I love these omnibuses because you just get these. I mean, they're all it's like 1,000 pages. I get to read this forever. It's good. Which by forever I mean it takes me a week. But
yeah.
Steve Ditko has these like short story ones, which are just classic horror short stories, and Stan Lee scripts them. There's a beautiful one. Oh, Lone Wolf and Cubs, good stuff.
So this is omnibus 1, right? This is huge, guys. There is so much story in this, and it's awesome. So I love buying these old manga omnibuses if you can get them. Lone Wolf and Cub, of course, is turned around backwards a little bit because it's from Japan originally, but it's still like this is another great one. It takes you a while to read out them.
Ditko's good. Masters of Suspense. That's his 50s and 60s work, which I really like. I also read one. This Chuck Dixon told me, he's like, because he said, I'm like, where do you get your inspiration from? And he says Archie Goodwin is the best comic writer of all time, and Archie Goodwin was a house writer for all these different deals back in the day. You can find them on Batman. You can find them, all over the map. And he, his best stuff, according to Chuck, is from there was a magazine called Creepy Magazine back in the day, and there's a Creepy Archives Archie Goodwin collection, and you can check out a lot of. Again, they're just horror short stories, and you just plow through those. Very good stuff, and also kind of forgotten. Now, where I got Dynamite Thor from is there's a website, and you can get you can read Dynamite Thor for free, by the way. Not my story, but you can read the old stories. And it's called digitalcomicmuseum.com. And it's got Golden Age and Silver Age comics that have all become public domain. And so they've uploaded them as digital files. Of course, they're not in print. There's a print company that does these too. I'll talk about that in a second. And they're all over the map. You have everything. You have superheroes, you have crime stories, you have Westerns, you have romance, whatever you want, you can find it on this digitalcomicmuseum.com. That's how I discovered Dynamite Thor. I just thought he was a ridiculous superhero. I'm like, this is immunity to explosives is so funny. And I just have to continue this. So digitalcomicmuseum.com is a great resource for reading old comics. And there's a company called Guandonaland, and I don't know how to spell this, comics. And they take the comics from Digital Comic Museum and actually put them in print. They don't do major restorations like I'm doing on Dynamite Thor, so you're going to get grainy scans and things like that from them a lot of the time. But if you want to read it in print and just want to check it out, that's a great way to go, to just check out random old stuff that's been forgotten by a lot of people.
Sounds good. Yeah, what a great suggestion. And that's a bunch of stuff that you can get for free. I mean, you can read it for free and really see what we're talking about with classic comics. Thinking again about classic comics, Jim Shooter had this policy of how to actually write comics where you have to have the conflict and the characters happen early on. And he enforced that rather rigorously and upset a lot of, I think a lot of the talent at Marvel was a little bit upset of the amount of editorial control he had over that. But that's really a kind of classic story writing.
Yes.
That is on display there. I think, I don't remember who I was having a conversation with on Twitter. They're like, you and me were like, Jim Shooter can save Marvel. Bring back Jim Shooter and he could save Marvel. It's like, well, he let all the talent left for DC under Jim Shooter. I'm like, how did that work out for DC?
Yeah, right.
Marvel kept making more money.
It didn't matter. And those guidelines are super useful. And that's what a good editor is supposed to do with these legacy properties is you want to give a kid who's coming in for the first time, 12 years old, 13 years old, 14 years old, the best reading experience possible. You want them to have fun right away. And you want them to, say, I had so much fun with this. I'm going to come back and have fun, for the next one. And that's the whole point of these little floppy comics. And he understood the psychology of how that worked.
Yeah. So here's Jim Shooter's prescribed story criteria. 1, the characters must be introduced in every issue. You have to have some way that lets the audience, because they may never have picked up a book before. So the characters must be introduced. The situation must be established. That's going to be like the backlog. The conflict must be introduced. Suspense must be built. Climax must be reached, and a resolution must be achieved for every issue. And so what he says is, he evaluates the story. Should one of these essential elements listed above be missing? I immediately suspect the author of the story knoweth not what he is doing.
Yeah, it's telling people, you know what? There's a formula that works. Don't be edgy, and I appreciate that, because I think when they get into these edgy attempts to be literary and get funky with their formats and all that, it really makes it hard to read and slows down the reading and makes it a lot less fun.
So one of my actual rules, if you guys pick up my new book, which you can pre-order here, Keys to Prolific Creativity, comes out March 27th. It's just a bunch of tips for people in whatever creative industry you're in for how to maximize your output. And I'm sure John could have written this because he has a ton of output. But one of my things is actually break the rules.
But I get to read yours now, so I don't have to write it.
Yeah. So I wanted to explain break the rules a little bit, because break the rules doesn't mean act as if there are no rules. There's a difference, because breaking the rules is acting against something that would normally be, like, say, phoned in or by the book. So you can always do a couple variations in any story that are surprising and different and outside of what's expected. But if you act as if there's no rules, then you're going to end up writing a story that people are going to be disconnected from and not understand. So I try to, with every story, do something that's a little bit different. If the standard thing is to have lots of scene breaks. I'll have longer scenes or something. So like with Voices of the Void, which is actually kind of turned into one of my most popular books, there's no chapter breaks and no scene breaks. It just goes straight through beginning to end. There's no breaks whatsoever. Whew. So that's a big rule break, right? Like, why would you do this? No one would ever suggest to do this. I'm like, because I wanted to. Now, everything else is in line, though. It's well structured. It's well plotted. And it does what it has a descent into madness, which I've talked about. Does everything else kind of by the book, but it does it does its continuity really outside the box. And so that makes it more interesting than it otherwise would be. If I had kind of done everything by the numbers, it just wouldn't have been as interesting a story in its presentation. Likewise, if I'd had multiple characters, if the only other characters are robots or people who are mute.
Nice.
Or a guy who's insane who has like 2 lines and then he dies. So it's a very lonely experience as well. So I break some of the rules. That doesn't mean you act as if there's no rules. And this is a little bit of a problem, I think, with some comics now, is they don't do those essential story things. If they do, if you're doing most of them and you're doing them well, you can kind of get away with not doing one of those, depending on what you're doing. But in general, you're probably going to want to hit all of those. You want a suspense, you want a climax, you want a resolution. These are basic things. Your story ought to have these. That doesn't mean you have to introduce the characters with the same way everybody else introduces their characters, with like the dialogue boxes or something like that. You can introduce them in a different way, but you need to introduce them.
Absolutely. No, I 100% agree. And that's something that's really missing in comics nowadays, because in this right for trade mentality, these middle issues really have so little story. You cannot pick it up and understand what's going on whatsoever. And it makes it hard for comic shops, because the comic shops has to like put these out on the shelves and try to sell these. And often they'll sell out of the first issue and then they won't have it anymore. And you just can't pick up a comic. You can't walk into a store and pick up a comic. That's absolutely absurd. But that's kind of the comic shop model's fault, and the way that industry's gone at this point. So I just say, the indies really have a spot where we can show the way by doing storytelling the right way, returning to the classic sort of structures that work and showing how that works, and ending this sort of like deconstructed hero dark nonsense that's going on, and just bring back fun again.
Yeah. And so here's another thing that I just got reminded of. So one of the things you see with modern story runs is the first issue sells really okay, or sometimes really well, and then the sales dip down for each of the following issues. So 6 issues is kind of the standard, but it could be longer or shorter, doesn't really matter. But people get hyped up when they hear about the first issue of a series. They buy it. The second issue doesn't sell as well. And by the time you get to the 5th issue, sometimes it gets canceled before you can finish the run, because so few people are continuing to buy the series. People fall off because the story's not good, or they don't care, or
sometimes there's a reaction online before the first issue even comes out, and the story gets canceled before it even comes out. I mean, it's really absurd.
Yeah, good point. So that's something that I noticed. But this is a problem too. If you go in and you're like, I want to buy issue 1, and they're like, well, we're out of issue 1. It's like, why is there this artificial scarcity? It's a really dumb thing, I think, from the comic book publishers to create this kind of artificial scarcity. They're doing everything to the long tail fans. It's like the people who want to collect books. Of course, they don't want infinite numbers of whatever issue you're coming out with, because they want to believe that their issue has some sort of resale value. They want to resell it on eBay. And I hear, whenever I pay attention to local comic shops, they're all saying, hey, I'd love to have that issue there for you, but people come in and they buy 6 of them to resell them on eBay at a jacked up price. That's basically Marvel and DC handing their money to the first people to buy the books, and not just selling as many books as they can. If they said, we will print books to demand, and actually did that, well, they would make more money, first of all. More people would buy books because they felt like they could always get one. Like if you walked into a store and you're like, man, my buddy Rob was telling me about this new Wolverine series that's going on. It's like, oh yeah, we have the first 4 books. you can buy them all, or you can just buy number one. I have another box full of number ones coming in, and you could just buy it, be able to go in and buy something on a whim, not have to buy it on eBay to catch up on a series that's only been going on for 3 months. That's kind of ridiculous to have that resale market and to give so much value to that resale market that you yourself don't take part in. It's the problem with
they went hard on that in the 90s, and unfortunately, what they did is they killed off so much of the audience that wasn't the collector market that they really had to just cater to what they had left, because they just screwed up so hard on that front. And now it's been a generation of that screw up of a problem. So there's just, I don't know what they could do at this point. On my end, I mean, I try to, for the most part, stock up a few issues at a time and just release like a graphic novel worth of content at a time, rather than try to even go with the issue model, because I think that's kind of a broken model at this point. So I do as much as I can on that front. If an artist is fast enough or can keep up, on the schedule, then I'm just going to release everything I got as one book.
Yeah, I think that's probably better. I mean, for what you're doing, for sure. But I like the idea of being able to sell as much as the market will actually take. This is a problem with collectible card games. Do the same thing. Collectors will get upset if Wizards of the Coast says that they're going to print more cards of a certain block of Magic the Gathering. I'm like, why are customers upset? It's because they bought that assuming that they could maintain the value of those cards or sell them at a profit later, rather than you selling the cards to as many people who want to play the game as possible. I think for the long-term growth, you want to sell as many copies as you can. And I'll see Manga doesn't do that. Manga will continue to print the collection number one of whatever manga series you want to buy. You just go to number one. All the bookstores will have number one. Though you can go get Berserk number one probably still at Barnes and Nobles.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So
I think I saw it in there last week.
Let's see here. Nope. There we go. Have you ever heard of the Golden Age Sandman? He wore a gas mask and trench coat and knocked criminals unconscious with a gas gun. There's also a 1990s Vertigo run, but I disliked it. I had not heard of a Golden Age Sandman.
I've heard of it. I know of its existence, but I've not read it. So, yep.
Okay. All right. So I haven't seen it. Neither has John. I don't know. What do you think would be a solution to this problem of not enough product, basically?
Well, I don't think there's a solution. I've kind of written off the comic shop model and the Marvel and DC model completely. Marvel and DC have made their own distribution network, which is a monopoly. They are a duopoly funneling into it. And yes, there's other tertiary stuff there, but that's not the real market. I mean, it's like 5% of the market other than them. And so they just flood the stands, do their thing. And these are movie property companies that are preserving copyright IPs at this point. They don't really care. So, that is what it is.
This is the thing I said. People are like, oh, they're going to shut down Marvel. And I could see Disney turning Marvel into an IP license house,
right?
Where this little publishing company is going to do a run of Wolverine, and they get the license for however many issues or something like that. But they're never going to just stop making X-Men comics or something.
It wouldn't make sense. Yeah,
it wouldn't make sense. That's not the point. The point is to they could lose money every year. Really, Disney can afford for Marvel to lose a whole lot of money within reason, and never have them actually close their doors, because they're generating, like you said, maintaining copyright and generating stories that they could possibly adapt. And if there's one that's really hot, then you can pay attention to that one and adapt. They did that with Civil War, and to some extent, they that was kind of a newer one, I think, and they actually did adapt that one because it was a big kind of hit.
Yeah.
So, no reason.
So that's that, and that's I guess for everybody else, it's just like, go to Amazon. You can print on demand comic books just like you can print on demand anything else. So, I've got my comic books up on Amazon. I've got my crowdfunds, of course, to cover my art costs and make sure we can get artists paid and keep continuing to make these. And those are the markets the way they are now. And you don't have to play by those rules that the comic shops are trying to do, because it just doesn't make sense anymore. Now, what I try to do is I try to have a limited product, like my hardcovers I don't sell on Amazon. So if you want to get the hardcovers, you got to get it on the crowdfund. That way you have a nicer edition or whatever that's Kickstarter exclusive, right? Sometimes I do a variant cover that's only Kickstarter exclusive. I'm not doing a variant cover on this one, just hard covers or soft covers. And the soft cover, I do it so that you have a Golden Age book, which is the Golden Age stories, and then the Dynamite Thor book, which is the Dynamite Thor stories, which is my story. So if you just want to get my story, I have the ability to do that. But I did it for both, and then the hardcover is going to have both of them together in one book, so it'll be a really nice, collected edition. So that's my thought. Just kind of do different editions for different markets, and then try to make the stories always available for people who are new.
Yeah, I mean, this was my thought too, which is just you can always do variant covers if you want to create artificial scarcity. I feel like a lot of the indie comics guys that used to be pros, used to work for Marvel and DC, that's the main thing they go for is limited product. There's now's your time, the only time that you can get this book. You can only get this amphibian book for a limited time, guys, and it's going to sell for $1,000 on eBay. It's like, why would you want to do that? Why would you? It's an offer of value to people. It's saying like, hey, you can buy my product and maybe it'll be valuable in the future. It's kind of a weird.
And indie comics in general don't get valuable. The ones that are valuable are always Marvel and DC ones, and it's always key issues of something that gets made into a film. That's it. So as an indie comic, you are not going to hit that lottery. So buying stuff based on that scarcity doesn't even make sense as a consumer. So I definitely don't want to play into that market at all.
Yeah. Is there a way to buy just your collection in Golden Age comics by itself?
I don't have a way to do that, and I'm doing that intentionally because I want you to buy my work.
All right. Well, there we go. So yeah, I mean, I was thinking you can always have the variant cover if you want it. That could be a scarce thing, and then just have the regular cover for everybody else that wants to buy on demand. Because me personally, as an author, I don't want scarcity of my books. I want as many of my books out in the world being read and enjoyed by people as humanly possible.
Absolutely.
I don't want scarcity at all. So it seems weird to me that a lot of these guys are selling things on that old scarcity model. I think they're really marketing to guys who bought comics in the 90s a lot.
They are. They're trying to they're recapturing the member berries glory, and it's not going to bring in new readers that way. So that's I'm very cognizant of wanting to bring in new readers that are going to be with me for 20, 30 years. And these guys are kind of later in their careers, so they probably aren't as concerned about that. But I feel like as an author, you always should be.
Yeah, I think so too. I always want new readers, and that's why I also keep trying to do new stuff too, not just plug away at the same series forever. It makes me think of Eric Larson. People were trying to bag on him for putting out. It's like, oh, you're only selling 5,000 copies of Savage Dragon 250 or something.
This drove me crazy. I got
5,000 copies is a lot of copies, dude. That's a lot. Huge.
It's more than if you think about the amount of content he's putting out 12 issues a year. That means, and that's just of copies of the issue, because then he sells the trade paperback version, then he sells the omnibus version. So how many copies does he add after that? I mean, it's more than any of these guys who are making crowdfunds are doing by far, copies wise. And it was Wes from Thinking Critical. He's a comic YouTube guy. He got really mad at me because he was really bagging on Eric Larson with this issue 250. He's like, it's $9.99. Do you think you're going to rip off people making a comic book at $9.99? And I'm just sitting here like, this guy is like touting these crowdfunds that are $25 for a book, which I understand that crowdfunds are $25 for a book because printing costs are what they are. When I'm going to print 300 books, I'm not going to get a good deal like somebody who prints 5,000 books is going to get. So it makes sense. But to bag on another guy for selling for $9.99 when you're championing that doesn't make sense. And then you drill down even further to it. Eric Larson's putting it at $9.99 because it's a 100-page comic issue. It's a full graphic novel. It's not like a 22-pager. He's offering a lot. Yeah.
And just to put stuff in comparison, I mean, I think I have it here. I have the Amazing Spider-Man. One of the 30th anniversary. What number is this? 375. Back in 1993, this was $4. Yeah. That was a lot. We're used to buying comics for like 99 cents or $2 back then.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to flip through it. It's a 60-page comic. It's a double size issue. So it was
Exactly.
never an issue to just buy a $5 comic if it was sufficient size. The complaint really is that they have like a 25 or 30 page floppy,
And then
and
sell it for
it's,
$25, right?
then, yeah. That I have a problem for. Then it's the same thing. People, why don't you sell your ebook for $9.99? I'm like, it's a 30,000 word book. $9.99 is not an appropriate price for a book that short. I'm sorry.
Right.
It's just not. I would feel bad, charging somebody $9.99, or someone might get upset that they pay $10 for a really short book. Sorry, that's just too much.
Absolutely.
People are aware of that value. Here's what Hardwick says. I often hear people trying to get into comics character by reading the latest issues, and always feel that they would have been better off starting with the golden or silver.
Always should, especially with the epic collections that we keep showing you. There's no reason not to. Just get any of those epic collections. You'll get like 25 issues worth. You can plow through. You'll get a feel for the characters. They're great.
Not only that, but you're going to see the great artists of the past and how they constructed things. Their art really holds up. If you get old stuff by Jack Kirby and stuff like that, you really get something really special with that as well. And what I love about these two is they have the covers like printed on the inside, so you can see who did the cover and what they were trying to go with the cover. It's just great stuff. John Romita is a great artist, and it's really, in some cases we've lost some of that clarity that these older artists like John Romita had. Just like really clear action. You never were questioning what the heck was going on in a panel. The construction of these, here's some like Web of Spider-Man stuff, I think. Where's the Spectacular Spider-Man? The black and white stuff is great too, because you can see just how you choose that. Spectacular Spider-Man. That's right.
Yeah.
You can really see how they choose what to draw and like what to avoid drawing, or what's going to be low detail. I think the composition of the older comics, the classic comics, is actually better than the newer ones. Let me articulate this and then I'll get your response. So I think the artistic composition of classic comics is in general better than newer comics. Newer comics tend to go for a very Baroque look, which is full of detail. But if you pack your picture with detail, you can actually lose sight of the story and what's actually supposed to be important. So if you have your highly Baroquely detailed character in a big panel, you can do it for like a splash page, like a full page. But a lot of times they do it in a panel, and he's doing something and the background is completely full of ink, or there's so much black on the page you have to stop and look to see where the faces are. You've screwed up. The proper way to compose things, all of everything is directed inwards towards the action. It's towards what matters in the story, and the other stuff needs to be out of detail. And when you look at, I like Romita's drawing a lot because he's great at this. So is Jack Kirby. John Buscema, of course, the master of this, and figuring out every single panel you pick up from John Buscema. It's directed exactly towards a face, what you're supposed to feel in that moment, what action is happening. There's never a question of what is going on in any panel. Just pulling up like a John Romita panel here, you can see the character is literally looking at what you're supposed to look at. It's just directing your eye exactly to this.
You're exactly on that newspaper right there. Yep.
Yeah, and there's no need for really anything else. Like you have a couple reaction bubbles, but it's boom right there.
Notice there's a lot of blank space in the background, so that you do focus in the panel on the figures that matter and on the things that you focus on. Mary Jane there, so you got the blank space, so it's not just full wall-to-wall detail like a splash page. And that's a problem with a lot of modern artists these days, is they just draw full splash pages like it's a work of, it is a work of art. It's beautiful a lot of the times, but it doesn't lend itself towards reading a story and reading a comic. Yeah. And this does.
This, for example, it's like there's a couple of prominent faces, and notice they get smaller as they're less important. The most important one, this is the star of the show.
Yep.
And then everyone else is reacting, and the background is just flashes. It's just nothing in the background, because we want to focus on the faces and what the faces are communicating with their expressions, right? Oh, by the way, what hand sign is she making? What's up?
Oh no! How racist!
Oh no! Cancel her quick. So I love it. Here's another example. look, what's he looking at? He's looking at what you're supposed to look at. You know, these are all cues towards what's happening in the story. And I feel that modern comics have actually lost that. So, you know, you can have your own opinion there about modern comics and what you like to see. But for me, I think because a comic is a story format, I like it when the attention is more directed towards what actually matters. I like the older composition of classic comics a little bit more than the new ones.
I 100% agree, and that's why I've been reading mostly older comics at this point. So, but it's the same thing with older books too. I mean, you've got the competition of just the hero's journey of the stories from these eras also, and you know, they just tightly do them. And now it feels like writers are trying to kind of, you know, just vomit words onto a page and meander, so they could be the next R.R. Martin or something like that, and not finish stories. I mean, it's the same sort of deal.
Yeah, a lot of times you also see panels like Bendis would do this with like dialogue, like 9 panels on a page of like the same expression or slightly different with a bunch of dialogue just everywhere. It's like, you're not playing to the medium. The medium's a visual medium. You got to use it. You got to use it well. And I noticed Stan Lee never had a problem with that. He was a writer, but he knew what he was doing in the comics medium, and he figured that out pretty darn quickly.
Absolutely. Good stuff.
Okay, so Dynamite Thor. Go ahead and link it again. You can back it there, and then you will also get this great classic Dynamite Thor comic as well. I want to make sure I plug that.
Yeah, we get both. We get both the old and the new for a wonderful reading experience, and just this full picture of the character. And you know, I think I do a really fun job of it. I think the setting which I chose for the modern in Reconstruction Iraq, having a character who's immune to explosives in a place riddled with you know, explosives going off is a lot of fun. So that's what we did with the comic. We tried to just tell a compact action like you'd get from these older comics in our own issue also. And I want to thank everybody who backed so far, because I got 3 new backers over the course of this. So thank you guys for coming in and supporting new projects. Yeah. Even
though this was basically shadow banned, you still got it funded.
That's the cool part. Yeah. People came in hard. We Kickstarter had it, so we could not be even searched for on the site. They fixed it. I really pestered them. But the first week of the campaign, we were effectively shut down. And if you know anything about crowdfund campaigns, that first 24, 48 hours, if nobody sees it, you are really in bad shape. And so that's what I had going on, was nobody was able to see my comic. They couldn't search it. I was listed by BackerKit as one of the top searched ones on Kickstarter at the time, but Dynamite Thor would just not come up for anybody. So I probably lost a lot of customers in those hours, and it's a bummer, but we recovered. We're going to make the book. We're funded. We got stretch goals and extra story content coming very shortly. I've got extra story content at 7,000 and 8,000. We got 2 more short stories. I want to do short stories as like a, you know, because the classics were all about the shorts. I've got this awesome t-shirt, which is the old Dynamite Thor uniform, kind of in like this retro t-shirt. I just got a notification that my proof copy of the t-shirt shipped, so I'll be wearing that on my stream pretty soon. Pretty fun. Yeah.
So speaking of short stories for my channel, I'm looking forward to doing a little bit more content on how to write short stories properly. I think a lot of people miss reading short stories because we're missing, you know, unless it's like Kursova or there's very few magazines that still print a lot of good short stories in the science fiction and fantasy space.
The traditional editing of short stories has really devolved into what kind of freaky concept can we come up with, and what's the twist at the end. And every story is about the twist and that freaky concept now in the short story market, except for Kursova magazine and a few other, and Story Hack's another one. But it's really lost a lot of the fun of short stories because of that, because you're reading for the twist. They're not reading for character. They're not reading for fun plot. And it's really hurt that medium a lot. But you know, some people still read it.
Yeah, I still write a lot of short fiction, and I like it. And I've done a couple hybrid, I guess, novellas that are a little bit longer than maybe a standard novella, pushing into short novel territory where I just kind of cut the fluff out. But I want to do some more content on that, because a lot of people ask, like, hey, I've been told that if I want to get into writing novels, I should start with short stories. And I actually don't think that's necessarily the best advice, because writing a novel is a really different beast. But if you like to read short stories, and I'd like to provide more access to what kind of short stories are great to read, and you like reading short stories, writing short stories can be a lot of fun, and you can get a lot of work done in a short amount of time with them. It's great to be able to finish a project. And so if you're going to write a short story, it feels just great to spend a week on something and it's complete and you're ready to ship it and let people read it and enjoy it. That's just a great feeling. Whereas if you're working for months on a full-length epic novel and then you finally finish it, it's just harder. It's just harder to get to that finish point.
It's tough, and you get into 50,000 words, and you're like, I've been writing this for a month and a half, and I'm still not done. It can get a little draining, I guess. But yeah, there's room for both, and they're definitely, I don't know, they're the same skill, but they're definitely different skills at the same time. So it's an interesting thing.
So yeah, I'm going to do some more content on that in the future. Film Girl says, thanks for the stream. Well, I appreciate everybody who's been here. I really appreciate it. Make sure you do tune in the future. There may not be a stream next week simply because I will be traveling. So I'll be in Texas for my grandfather's funeral. And I don't know if I'll be able to run a stream on the road. And if I am able to do that, then I think I'll have JD Cowan on.
He's cool
in the chat. And so that will be just a ton of fun. But if not, then that's going to happen in 2 weeks and we'll just figure it out from there. I will give away free books of this new book if you are tuning into the live stream. So if you want a free book, make sure you're showing up Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to have limited quantities of the free ebook version of Keys to Prolific Creation or Creativity for those of you who are looking to up your creative game and actually put out some stuff. Actually get projects complete and get a lot of projects complete and become prolific. That's really what this book is directed towards, no matter what area you tend to be involved in, whether it's music or it's writing books or it's producing comics or art or something else. This will help you to develop a creative process that will work for you and help you to finish things on time and under budget, just like Jim Shooter would actually approve of. So make sure that you are staying tuned for all of that. Let me see if there's any more chat that we can pick up here.
Beautiful.
You're kind of printing short stories when you read them in your videos. That's an awesome series, by the way. I'm going to keep doing more of that. I didn't get around to doing more of it this week. Just ran out of time. That's all. Last question. What are your thoughts on classic humor comics like The Golden Age, Little Abner, Pogo, Blondie, and Archie? I like Archie.
Archie's great. What I'm reading right now is Uncle Scrooge and Donald Duck, believe it or not. And these are some of the best comics I've ever read. Look up Carl Banks and Don Rosa was from the 80s, but Carl Banks was the one doing it back in the Golden Age and all that. And both of them are just wonderful. There's these nice collections, library editions of those comics, and they are phenomenal. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to have. I'll get Bryson and Alex on at some point, I'm sure. Story Hack is also great. So both of those, Kirsova and Story Hack, I'll show for them a little bit. Those are great magazines that you can pick up. They are like the old sci-fi mags of yore. Weird Tales and all of those other ones that you probably liked. Amazing Fantasy and trying to remember all of them. So it's more like that. Lots of exciting stories in sci-fi and fantasy space.
Love it.
Check this out.
I buy both of those. Endorsed.
Okay. All right. So thanks so much, guys. We will see you guys next time. John Della Rose, he's an author of many books as well. We didn't even talk about all his other books, but you can find him on Twitter as well as check out his Kickstarter. And we'll see you guys next time. Anything else, John?
We the best comics.
Yeah. All right. Okay, guys. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.